My husband's mistress spiked my drink, but I made her drink it instead. A moment later, my husband froze on the spot, his eyes wide at the scene unfolding before him. On a table draped in pristine white silk, a single cocktail glowed with an ethereal blue light. Under the glittering crystal chandeliers of the grand ballroom, it sparkled like a rare gem, a mesmerizing piece of art. But to me, right now, it was no mere beverage. It was a poisoned chalice, a death sentence for my reputation, perfectly disguised in its most beautiful form. I knew that swirling within that captivating blue liquid was more than just alcohol, syrup, and a fresh slice of lime. It contained a powerful aphrodisiac, potent enough to turn the most virtuous woman into a crazed creature, stripped of reason and ruled by her most primal, humiliating instincts. And the person who had meticulously crafted this special gift was standing right in front of me, smiling as sweetly as an angel. In this opulent ballroom of a 5-star hotel, where hundreds of people clinked glasses to celebrate the success of our company, I was the only one who felt a chill deep in my bones. The crystalline light pouring from the massive chandeliers made everything look luxurious and dazzling, but it also made it all seem profoundly hypocritical, especially the smile on the face of the man on stage. Richard Anderson, my husband. He was giving a speech, thanking our business partners and employees. Then, his gaze shifted to a woman in a shimmering emerald dress, his voice laced with an affection he didn't even try to hide. And a special thanks to the head of our marketing team, Scarlett Jones, whose talent and passion belie her young age. A wave of applause erupted from the audience. Scarlett stood and gave an elegant bow, her coquettish eyes flicking in my direction for a split second. It was a look brimming with the arrogance of a victor. I simply maintained a perfect socialite smile and raised my wineglass from the table in a gesture of acknowledgement. But beneath the table, my other hand was clenched into a fist so tight my knuckles had turned white. I was all too familiar with this play. For the past 6 months, from the day that little vixen set foot in the company, every corporate event had become a private stage for her and my husband. They played out their passionate office romance, reducing me, the legal wife who had built this company from scratch with Richard, to a faint shadow. I knew everything. I knew where their late-night meetings really took place. I knew his sudden business trips were actually lavish vacations with his mistress, but I chose silence. I understood that a loud, messy fight with a snake like Scarlett would only make me a laughingstock and push my husband further away. I needed one fatal blow, one that would utterly destroy her, and my intuition told me that tonight was my chance. After the speech, Scarlett was the first to approach my table, her expensive perfume assaulting my senses. It was sweet, but sickeningly artificial. "Victoria," she said, her voice like honey, "you look absolutely stunning tonight. I was so worried you wouldn't come, because of all those silly misunderstandings." I took a sip of wine and looked her straight in the eye. "Why wouldn't I?" I replied coolly. "It's the company's party, and I'm still the majority shareholder. A lot of people would wonder if I didn't show up, don't you think?" Scarlett's smile faltered for a fraction of a second, but she quickly recovered. "You're right, of course. We're practically family now, we should be closer." "Oh," I asked the bartender to make a special cocktail just for you. It's his signature recipe, called a Blue Lagoon. I thought the color would go perfectly with your dress tonight. Please, accept it as my apology gift." As she finished, she signaled a waiter. A few moments later, a jewel-toned blue cocktail, lavishly garnished with a pineapple wedge and a maraschino cherry, was placed before me. It was breathtakingly beautiful, but in my eyes, it was a cleverly disguised cup of poison. Why a special cocktail? Why only for me? A woman's intuition screamed that this was a trap. I glanced toward my husband. He was talking to another partner, but I caught him stealing a look at me and the cocktail. It was a mixture of anticipation and a flicker of guilt. Everything became clear. They had orchestrated another performance, and this time they intended for me to pay a very high price, but they were wrong, because I was the one directing this play. I turned to Scarlett with a surprisingly warm smile. "Thank you, Scarlett. That's so thoughtful of you." I reached for the cocktail glass. In that instant, I saw an unmistakable glint of triumph in her eyes. She thought her prey had walked straight into the trap. She had no idea that in that very moment, a different chessboard was unfolding in my mind. And on this board, she wasn't the hunter. She was just a pawn, marching straight toward her own demise. The Blue Lagoon cocktail sat before me, as beautiful as a poisoned gem. I could feel the gazes of Scarlett and my husband locked onto my every move. They were like two predators, holding their breath, waiting for their prey to walk into the snare. 1,000 plans flashed through my mind. I couldn't refuse it. That would ruin the performance. I couldn't drink it. I knew exactly what awaited me. I needed an opportunity, a perfect moment to turn the tables, a split-second diversion, and that opportunity was one I would create myself. I looked up and offered Scarlett a brilliant smile, one I knew was disarming enough to lower her guard. "You're so considerate. But I feel bad drinking this all by myself. How about this? Let's have the bartender make another one, exactly the same. We can toast together, like sisters, and put all these misunderstandings behind us. What do you say?" The proposal was so reasonable that Scarlett couldn't refuse. Besides, toasting with me in front of Richard would only solidify her image as a gracious mistress and a forgiving friend. She immediately beamed and nodded. "Victoria, that's a wonderful idea. You see, Richard? I told you she was a bigger person than you thought." She quickly summoned the waiter. A few minutes later, a second Blue Lagoon, identical to the first in every detail, from its color to its garnish, was placed right beside mine. Now, 2 identical cocktails sat on the table, shimmering with the same magical blue hue. One contained innocence, the other, a humiliating trap. Scarlett cheerfully picked up her glass, ready to toast, but I was one step ahead. "Wait a second," I said, my voice full of excitement. "For a moment as meaningful as this, we have to capture it. A picture for posterity." I pulled out my phone and stood up, pulling Scarlett close. "Right here. The whole ballroom in the background will be beautiful." Drunk on the fantasy of her impending victory, she happily obliged. We stood shoulder to shoulder, the 2 cocktails left untouched on the table. I raised my phone, framing the shot. Then, just as I was about to press the shutter, I subtly nudged my own side with my elbow. My pricey alligator skin clutch slipped from my grasp and clattered onto the marble floor. The contents: lipstick, a powder compact, a jumble of keys scattered everywhere. "Oh no!" I gasped, feigning dismay. With the instinct of someone who always wanted to show off, Scarlett immediately bent down. "I'll get it, Victoria." She had no idea that in the moment she crouched, she had completely diverted attention from the main stage. It was the golden 3 seconds I had been waiting for. With her back conveniently blocking everyone's view and my husband momentarily distracted, my hand moved like a ghost across the table. The positions of the 2 glasses were swapped, swift and silent. The poisoned cocktail was now in a new spot, awaiting a new owner. "Here you go," Scarlett said, standing up and handing me the clutch with both hands, her face a mask of innocence. "Thank you so much," I replied smoothly, taking the clutch and putting my phone away. "Now, let's drink up before the ice melts." I picked up my cocktail and gestured for her to take the remaining one. The play had now been perfectly recast according to my script. I raised my glass, looked her straight in the eye, and said with terrifying sincerity, "To our family's harmony and to the future. Cheers, Scarlett." She smiled radiantly and clinked her glass against mine. A clear, ringing sound echoed between us. She had no idea that sound was the tolling of the bell for her own downfall. As I and my treacherous husband watched, Scarlett tilted her head back and drank the cocktail in one long, confident gulp. She drank it as if she were swallowing the sweet nectar of victory itself, imagining that in just a few minutes I would be the one writhing in humiliation. But she was wrong. The drug she had so carefully prepared was now flowing silently through her own veins. The star of the show she had painstakingly orchestrated was no longer me. The cruel weapon, disguised in beauty, was now safely inside Scarlett's stomach. She placed the empty glass down on the table with a firm click, the gesture of a hunter who believes their prey has been utterly vanquished. A faint, almost imperceptible smirk played on her red lips. But having studied her every move for 6 months, I could read it all: the contempt, the sadistic pleasure in seeing a perfect plan unfold. I, too, slowly finished my cocktail. The pure taste of cool mint and tangy lime spread across my palate, helping me maintain the cold composure I would need for what was to come. I knew that from this moment on, there was no room for even the slightest error. "What a delicious cocktail," I said, breaking the tense silence between the three of us. My voice was so calm it surprised even me. Not a tremor of fear, only an icy resolve. "Thank you again for this special gift." Scarlett turned to me, her smile now open and undisguised. "I'm so glad you like it, Victoria. I'm sure we'll have many more opportunities to enjoy delicious things together in the future." She deliberately emphasized the word future, as if alluding to the position she was about to usurp. I simply nodded, thinking to myself, "There will be no future for you, my dear. At least not the one you're imagining." We returned to the main table, amidst the hum of social chatter. My husband, Richard, shot me a quick glance before hastily looking away. In his eyes, I saw a chaotic mix of guilt, anxiety, and an even greater amount of cowardice and resignation. He was a complete accomplice, allowing the honor of his wife of 20 years to be sacrificed for the sordid scheme of his young mistress. He thought he could absolve himself of all responsibility by remaining silent. But he was wrong. On this chessboard, his silence was the most damning confession of all. The invisible monster was now unleashed, beginning its journey through her bloodstream. She looked at me, the mask now gone, her eyes holding the pity and contempt of a victor looking down on the vanquished. She believed she had won, the bait was taken, the line was pulled, and the fish was on the chopping block. I calmly set down my wine glass and met her gaze with a slight nod. The play wasn't over. Act 1 had just concluded. And as the director, I could promise that the following acts would be far more thrilling and dramatic. Now, all I had to do was wait. The sweetness of those hard-working, happy years had vanished, replaced by the bitter taste of betrayal rising in my throat. I looked at Richard, the man who was once my entire world. Now he was flustered and panicking over his mistress's increasingly erratic and uncontrollable behavior. My heart felt no pain anymore. It was numb, frozen, solid. 6 months ago, on a rainy afternoon, I had stumbled upon the truth. It wasn't a dramatic, cinematic raid on a love nest. The truth came to me quietly, cruelly. I had simply picked up his tablet to look up some information for our son's school. And there it was, a chat window, still open. Countless messages, countless photos, and vulgar terms of endearment he hadn't used with me in over a decade. It was like a sledgehammer to my head, and in an instant, my entire world shattered. The woman in the messages was none other than Scarlett Jones, the young, competent head of marketing whom I had praised in front of my husband several times. It turned out she was the serpent quietly eating away at my marriage. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat curled in the darkness of my study, reading and rereading every line they had sent each other, looking at every photo. The tears streamed down my face, not from jealousy, but from the searing pain of realizing how shamelessly I had been deceived. Our love, our trust, my 20 years of sacrifice, it had all become a ridiculous farce in the blink of an eye. I wanted to scream, to confront them, to burn everything to the ground. I wanted to run to the office and rip off Scarlett's hypocritical mask in front of every employee. But in the deep of the night, when I saw my own haggard, pathetic reflection in the mirror, I snapped out of it. I couldn't fall apart like this. I was Victoria Anderson, the woman who had once built all of this from nothing alongside her husband. I wouldn't let some young fox snatch away everything that belonged to me so easily. A messy fight was a losing strategy. It would only diminish my dignity and make me a pitiful woman. I needed a plan, a brilliant one, that would not only unmask them but also protect my assets and the fruits of my youth. After that fateful night, I stopped crying. I started acting. My first step was to secretly contact Daniel, a brilliant lawyer and a friend I could trust implicitly. I told him everything. Daniel not only gave me sharp legal advice, but also recommended a reliable private investigator. I decided to have Richard and Scarlett followed. I needed to know their every move, every plot, every plan. Knowledge was power, and I had to arm myself with it. Reports, photos, and audio files from the investigator began arriving daily. Each piece of information was like another blade twisting in my heart, but at the same time, it forged my will into steel. I found out they frequently met in a luxury apartment that Richard had secretly bought for her with company funds. I discovered that Scarlett didn't just want to be a mistress, she was quietly trying to consolidate power within the company, cozying up to minor shareholders. Her ambition was far greater than I had imagined. Then, about 2 weeks ago, the investigator brought me something that made my blood run cold. He had successfully planted a micro-recorder in a designer handbag Richard had gifted to Scarlett. The recording revealed a plot so cruel it gave me goosebumps. It was a conversation between Scarlett and a man named Vince. Scarlett's sharp voice echoed, every word crystal clear from the recording. "Here's the plan," she said. "At the year-end gala, I'll find a way to slip an aphrodisiac into that old hag's drink. The strong stuff, the kind that would make a nun go wild. Once it kicks in, Vince, you'll pretend to be a drunk guest and help her to her room. Room 2107. I've already booked it. You know what to do. You don't have to actually do anything. Just act. Get her clothes off, lie on top of her, make the scene look really hot. Richard and I will burst in and catch her in the act. We'll film everything, of course." The man named Vince asked, "Are you sure about this, Miss Jones?" "She's the chairman's wife." Scarlett let out a chillingly cold laugh. "That's exactly why we have to do it. With irrefutable evidence of her affair, we can force her into a divorce where she gets nothing. That woman is so pretentious, she only cares about her precious reputation. You just do as I say. When it's done, $40,000 is yours." After listening to the recording, I sat in stunned silence. My heart felt like it had stopped. I couldn't imagine that such a young woman could possess such a venomous heart and a cruel mind. She didn't just want my husband, she wanted to utterly destroy my reputation and throw me out onto the street penniless. Rage boiled within me, but strangely, behind the anger, a terrifying calm washed over me. If they wanted to play a big game, I would play along, but I wouldn't play by their rules. I would rewrite the rules of the game myself. And so, everything was set in motion. I knew all about the cocktail, I knew about room 2107, and I knew about the strange man who would soon appear. Scarlett thought she was setting the perfect trap. She didn't know she was just a puppet, dancing in a play that I was directing. She was eagerly taking step after step into the very trap she had so carefully prepared for me. And I just had to sit here, enjoy my wine, and wait for the curtain to rise on a scene where all the lies and wickedness of the traitors would be laid bare. My smile remained the perfect socialite's mask, but inside, an invisible countdown had begun. I calculated in my head. With a dose this strong, the effects should start to manifest in about 15 to 20 minutes. That was more than enough time for me to savor the gradual disintegration of my enemy. We sat at the table. Richard was the most nervous one. He kept glancing at his watch, then back at me, his eyes filled with a probing curiosity. He was probably wondering why I, the intended victim, seemed perfectly fine. Scarlett, on the other hand, was completely at ease. She was sure of her victory. She swirled the wine in her glass, looking at me with a provocative glint in her eyes, as if waiting for me to show the first signs of losing control. 5 minutes passed in suffocating silence. 10 minutes. I was still chatting amiably with a few other guests at our table, discussing real estate market trends and new design aesthetics. I was deliberately sharp, articulate. Every logical point I made, every flawless argument, seemed to douse Richard's confidence with cold water. I could see the growing bewilderment on his face. Then, exactly as I had anticipated, at the 12-minute mark, the first signs began to appear in Scarlett. It started subtly, a slight furrow of her brow. She stopped mid-sentence and raised a hand to gently rub her temple. Then she took her water glass and drank it all in one go, but it didn't seem to help. The pale white of her meticulously made-up face began to flush with a light pink. At first, it just looked like she was tipsy, but I knew it was the signal that the drug's fire was beginning to burn from within. A few minutes later, that pink blush deepened and spread, turning her entire face an unnatural, feverish red. It didn't stop there. It crept down her white neck and onto the exposed skin of her décolletage. She looked as if she had just stepped out of a scorching sauna. She started to fidget. Her slender hands, which had been resting demurely on her lap, began to move restlessly. She raised a hand, her long fingers tracing her own neckline, then gave the collar of her dress a slight tug, as if desperate for more air. Her breathing changed, too. It was no longer even and gentle, but shallow and rapid. Occasionally, she would take a deep, shuddering breath, her chest rising and falling noticeably beneath her silk dress. The look in her eyes lost its usual sharp, haughty focus. Her pupils seemed to dilate, making her eyes appear larger, unnaturally bright, and moist. They became hazy and unfocused, as if she were looking at some phantom world. Richard, sitting right next to her, couldn't fail to notice this sudden transformation. He stopped talking completely and stared at Scarlett. "What's wrong?" he asked in a low, worried voice. "You're all red. Do you want to step outside for some fresh air?" Scarlett flinched, as if pulled back to reality from another world. She shook her head and tried to force a smile, but it looked strained. I'm fine. It's probably just the alcohol. It must be stronger than I thought." She said this, but her gaze wasn't on Richard. It was drifting unconsciously over the men at the surrounding tables. It was a look her rational mind could no longer control. The show was truly beginning. Her body was now a furnace, and she could no longer sit still. "Richard," she said, turning to my husband. Her voice was no longer her usual flirtatious tone. It was thick and husky. Her hand moved brazenly to rest on his chest. "I feel strange. I'm so hot." Richard froze. He couldn't believe his eyes. At a formal gala, in front of hundreds of partners and employees, his elegant, intelligent mistress was behaving like a cheap bar girl. He quickly grabbed her hand, pulling it off him, his face flushing with a mixture of shame and anger. "Are you crazy?" he hissed through gritted teeth. "Stop it, right now. People are watching." But his words had no effect. The whispers around them had now turned into audible gossip. All eyes were on our table, filled with curiosity, confusion, and contempt. "My God, look at Scarlett Jones. She's completely wasted. How embarrassing for Mr. Anderson. That doesn't look like she's just drunk. Something seems off." I sat there, my expression still serene, holding my wine glass. I watched Richard. I saw the pure humiliation written all over his face. He was paying the price for his betrayal. He had been so proud of his young, beautiful, and competent mistress. Now, because of her, he was being humiliated in front of hundreds of people. He tried to push Scarlett away, but she clung to him like an octopus. The scene she had prepared for me, she was now performing it brilliantly herself. And I, the only audience member who knew the entire script, felt a deep, satisfying pleasure. This was just the appetizer. The main course was still waiting for them. The chaotic scene at our table became the focal point of the entire ballroom. Richard Anderson, the powerful chairman, now looked no different than a clown floundering in extreme embarrassment. He tried to push Scarlett away, tried to cover her mouth, but every effort was in vain. Scarlett had transformed into someone else entirely. She was no longer the sharp, aloof head of marketing. She was a woman shamelessly displaying her desires. I sat there, silent as a ghost, observing the tragedy unfold before me. I saw the helplessness and shame on Richard's face. He couldn't meet anyone's eyes, his head bowed, wishing the ground would swallow him whole. He had completely lost control of the situation. And right then, I knew my moment had come. While everyone was fixated on Richard and Scarlett, I glanced toward the far end of the ballroom. A tall man in a well-tailored black suit stood there, arms crossed, quietly observing the scene. It was my trump card, Vince. Our eyes met for a brief second. I gave a subtle nod. He understood my signal and began to move. At the same time, Scarlett, in her hazy state, seemed to have found her savior. Her unfocused gaze scanned the crowd and landed on Vince. This was part of her plan. When the drug took effect, Vince was supposed to appear like a hero and escort the victim to the room. She had no idea that the victim was now her, and this hero was actually the executioner leading her to the guillotine. Scarlett summoned her last ounce of strength and gave Richard a small shove. She staggered to her feet, her voice husky but still trying to sound coherent. "Excuse me, everyone. I'm so sorry." "I've had too much to drink. I think I need to go lie down." She was speaking to Richard, but her eyes were darting toward Vince, sending a secret signal. Richard just wanted to escape this humiliation as quickly as possible. He had no capacity to notice such small details. When Scarlett said she wanted to go to a room, he nodded mechanically, unable to look her in the face. Yes, go rest. He didn't even think to help his own mistress. Cowardice had completely consumed him. Just as planned, Vince approached. Playing the part of a concerned guest, he said in a worried tone, "Ma'am, you don't look well. Would you like me to help you to your room?" Without a hint of suspicion, Scarlett nodded. She leaned heavily on Vince's strong arm, like a drowning person clutching at a straw. She thought everything was proceeding according to her perfect plan. She was being escorted to a room by a strange man, and soon, the adultery bust would take place. She didn't realize that this path from the ballroom to the elevator was not the road to victory, but the road to hell. They walked across the ballroom. It was an ironic spectacle, the chairman's mistress, drunk and disheveled, being supported by a complete stranger. Meanwhile, her traitorous lover sat frozen at the table, his face ashen. The entire scene was captured by hundreds of eyes and dozens of secretly recording cell phones. The reputations of Scarlett Jones and Richard Anderson were being utterly destroyed right here, at the very party they had been so proud of. I watched their backs until the gleaming steel elevator doors slowly closed, swallowing them both. I knew that upstairs, in room 2107, the main stage was already set. The lighting, the camera, and all the necessary props. Vince would play his part perfectly. He would give Scarlett a taste of exactly what she had planned for me. And now, I had to prepare for my own role. The role of the worried wife, the wife shocked to discover the truth. I had to time it perfectly. Go up too early, and I'd spoil the show. Go up too late, and I'd miss the best part. I took a sip of wine. The bitter taste sharpened my senses. I looked at Richard. He was still sitting there, motionless as a statue, staring into space with empty eyes. He was probably trying to process what had just happened, but he wouldn't have much time for that. Because in a few moments, I was about to give him a shock 10 times greater. Perfect, I thought. It's time for me to begin my performance. I won't give Richard a chance to escape. He co-created this play with Scarlett, so he must be an audience member and witness her devastating downfall to the very end. I took a deep breath, ready to deliver the first line that would lead my treacherous husband to the gates of hell. The polished stainless steel elevator doors reflected Richard's ashen, terrified face. He kept reaching up to loosen his designer tie, as if it were a noose tightening around his neck, choking him. The air in the small elevator suddenly felt oppressive and heavy. Despite the air conditioning blasting at full capacity, I leaned against the corner, maintaining a safe distance, silently observing the man being consumed by his own terror. The red digital numbers climbed slowly, almost as if deliberately taunting Richard's anxiety. 18, 19, 20. With each floor, I could see beads of sweat forming on his forehead and temples. He kept muttering to himself, fragmented words like a desperate prayer. "No, nothing's happened. She's just drunk." A clear ding announced our arrival on the 21st floor. The doors slid open to reveal a long, quiet hallway carpeted in thick, deep red velvet. The atmosphere was luxurious yet vaguely sinister. Soft yellow light from the wall sconces cast intersecting patterns of light and shadow, making the space feel even more mysterious. Richard shot out of the elevator like an arrow. His fear had morphed into a frantic urgency. He could not let his reputation, the reputation of the entire corporation he led, be destroyed by a humiliating scandal. He had to quell the situation before my fabricated hotel security arrived, before things spiraled out of control. I followed calmly behind him. My high heels made no sound on the thick carpet. I was like a phantom, silently tailing my prey as he rushed headlong into the trap I had set. The hallway was long and dim. The deeper we went, the quieter it became, until the only sounds were Richard's ragged breathing and the pounding of my own heart. 2,000, 105, 2,000, 106. The gleaming brass numbers on the wooden doors flashed past. And then, when we were just a few steps from 2107, a strange sound began to break the deathly silence. At first, it was faint, a muffled groan. But as we got closer, the sounds became clearer, more explicit. It was a mixture of a woman's ragged breaths and wanton moans, punctuated by the rhythmic sound of bodies colliding. Richard stopped dead in his tracks. His entire body went rigid, his feet seemingly rooted to the floor. His already pale face turned a ghastly white. He turned to me, his eyes filled with panic and a silent question. "What is that sound?" I shrugged, playing the part of the shocked, innocent wife to perfection. I brought a hand to my mouth, my eyes wide. "I don't know," I said, my voice trembling. "It sounds like it's coming from 2107. Oh my God, Miss Jones, surely not." I deliberately trailed off, letting his imagination paint the worst possible scenario, and it worked. The possessive jealousy, the rage of being cheated on right under his nose, and the terror of the impending scandal, it all overwhelmed him. He couldn't think straight anymore. Blood rushed to his head, his eyes turned bloodshot, and his hands clenched into tight fists. The lewd sounds from behind the door continued, growing louder, more brazen, like thousands of needles stabbing at a betrayed man's pride. He couldn't take it anymore. Humiliation turned to fury. "Damn it," he growled in a low, guttural voice, and lunged toward the door of 2107. He didn't knock. He didn't need to. As a VIP client and the host of a massive event at the hotel, he had a master key card. I watched as he fumbled for the card in his wallet, his hands shaking so badly he missed the electronic lock several times. A dry click sounded as the lock disengaged. Consumed by rage, Richard threw his entire weight against the heavy wooden door without a moment's hesitation. The door flew open, slamming against the interior wall with a loud bang. And in that instant, all the obscene noises from inside abruptly ceased. I held my breath behind him. The climax of the play, the very moment I had been waiting for 6 long months, had finally arrived. The gates of hell had been thrown open, and I knew the sight within would be a scar seared into my traitorous husband's mind forever. It would be the death sentence that would end not only his secret love affair, but also the future and reputation he held so dear. The loud bang of the door hitting the wall seemed to be the starting gun that ended all the sordid sounds inside, ushering in a deathly silence. Richard stood frozen on the threshold, a statue of rage caught mid-motion. I stood directly behind him, and through the gap between his arm and his body, I could see the entire scene within. It was more graphic, more brutal than anything I had imagined. The suite, the very room Scarlett had carefully chosen to humiliate me, had now become the stage for her own downfall. The room was dimly lit, with only a few floor lamps casting a hazy yellow glow that made the atmosphere feel even more sordid and pathological. Clothes were strewn carelessly across the floor. Scarlett's emerald dress was a crumpled heap in a corner. Her designer heels lay in different spots, and Vince's black suit was tossed unceremoniously beside them. And on the massive white bed in the center of the room, the scene was almost too much to bear. The elegant, poised head of marketing from just minutes ago was gone. In her place was a woman in a frenzied state. Her artfully styled hair was a tangled mess, stuck to her forehead and cheeks with sweat. Her perfect makeup was smeared, revealing flushed skin, swollen lips, and eyes glazed over with a drug-induced haze. She was coiled around the strange man like a snake. That man, Vince, was in a similar state of undress, his muscular, sweat-slicked back exposed. But if you looked closely, there was one stark difference. While Scarlett was completely out of control, Vince's eyes were perfectly, chillingly lucid. When the door burst open, he was the first to react. He lifted his head and looked directly at us. And for a fleeting moment, I saw the corner of his mouth twitch into an almost imperceptible smirk. The smirk of a man who had executed his mission flawlessly. But that wasn't the most horrifying part. The thing that made Richard freeze in place, the thing that turned him from a roaring lion into a speechless man, was on the small nightstand by the bed. There, propped up neatly on a makeshift stand, was a cell phone, Scarlett's cell phone. The screen was still lit, and most importantly, the flash on the rear camera was brightly illuminated, pointed directly at the two entangled bodies on the bed. It was recording. It was documenting everything. Every move Scarlett made, every gesture, every single one of her most humiliating moments was being captured in high definition. A heavy silence descended upon the room. Time seemed to stop. All I could hear was the pounding of my own heart and Richard's heavy, ragged breaths. He stood there, motionless. I could see his chest heaving violently. His face went through a complex series of transformations in a matter of seconds. First, utter disbelief, as if he couldn't process the scene before him. Then, a rabid fury, the kind that comes when a man's pride is trampled into the dust. And finally, as the full truth dawned on him, complete and utter collapse. This wasn't an accidental affair. This was a deliberately planned setup. That recording phone was the irrefutable proof. The woman he had trusted so much, the woman he was willing to abandon his family for, was a promiscuous tramp who would casually sleep with a stranger in a hotel room. And not only that, she was filming the whole thing herself. For what? As a souvenir? Or for some other purpose? Richard's mind must have been reeling. He may have been foolish and infatuated, but he wasn't a complete idiot. He began to connect the dots. The special cocktail just for Victoria. Scarlett's bizarre behavior after she mistakenly drank it. Her suggestion to go rest. The helpful stranger who appeared out of nowhere. And now, room 2107, the recording phone, and the scene before him. It all clicked into place. The play Scarlett had prepared for me was real. Only the lead actress had been changed. I saw Richard's hands begin to tremble no longer from anger, but from a profound terror and despair. He had been tricked. He had been made a fool, a pawn in a dirty scheme, by the woman he loved most. This collapse was 1,000 times more painful than simply being cheated on. It was the collapse of trust, the collapse of pride, the collapse of every fantasy he had built. On the bed, Vince seemed to decide the performance had gone on long enough. He gently pushed Scarlett off him. Still in a daze, she whimpered and tried to pull him back. Vince frowned slightly and used a bit more force, shoving her completely to the side. He sat up, showing no sign of panic or fear. He calmly reached over, picked up the phone, stopped the recording, and slipped it into his pants pocket. Then he turned to look at Richard, still frozen in the doorway, and said, "Mr. Anderson, I think we can wrap up the performance Miss Jones hired me for, don't you?" Vince's words, though spoken in a low voice, had the destructive force of a bomb detonating in the quiet room. They slammed into Richard's eardrums, piercing through the shells of rage and shock, driving deep into the core of his consciousness. The performance Miss Jones hired me for. Each word was like a shard of broken glass, slicing through his mind, piecing together a terrible truth, a truth more horrific than mere betrayal. Richard was paralyzed. He stood on the threshold between reality and illusion, his entire body rigid. His face cycled through a dramatic series of colors, from the red of fury to the white of terror, finally settling on the ashen gray of collapse and despair. He opened his mouth as if to scream, but the brutal truth choked him, and no sound came out. This was a complete physical and mental shutdown. I was right behind him, and I could feel every muscle in his body tense up, turning him into a living statue. His breath seemed to have been knocked out of his lungs. His bloodshot eyes, now bulging from their sockets, were fixed on the scene on the white bed. His brain was refusing to process the images his retinas were sending. That woman, writhing in a daze, moaning wantonly, wrapped naked around a stranger, that can't be Scarlett. It can't be the elegant, intelligent head of marketing he was so smitten with. It can't be his young mistress who always looked at him with eyes full of adoration and love. But it was her. The messy hair, the flushed face, and even the charming mole just below the corner of her lips that he had once adored. There was no mistaking it. A maelstrom of emotions tore through Richard's mind. At first, extreme denial. This has to be a terrible misunderstanding. Maybe he's drunk, dreaming. He instinctively raised a hand to rub his eyes, a childish gesture to ward off a nightmare. But when he opened them again, the scene was still there, vivid and cruel. Denial quickly gave way to a rabid rage. His blood boiled. The woman he had considered his treasure, his muse, his reason for abandoning his family, was now exposing her body to another man, offering the sounds he thought were his alone to a stranger. This betrayal was 1,000 times more painful than the one I had endured, because at least I had kept my dignity. But he was a cuckold, a fool, made a spectacle in front of his own eyes. I saw his hands clench into fists, knuckles white, blue veins throbbing at his temples and neck. He wanted to charge in, to scream, to drag that man off the bed and beat him to a pulp. He wanted to grab Scarlett by the hair, haul her up, and demand an explanation. But he couldn't, because immediately after the rage came a colder, more numbing realization: his own stupidity. Why was Scarlett here with another man? And why was there a cell phone, propped up and recording with the flash on, aimed squarely at the bed? What kind of cheater does that? What if this wasn't cheating? What if this was a setup? The scattered puzzle pieces began to reassemble themselves in his mind into a horrifyingly perfect picture: the cocktail for Victoria, Scarlett's odd behavior, the stranger, room 2107, the recording phone. It was all one plan, a plan in which I was supposed to be the victim. Scarlett and this man were just actors, and he, Richard Anderson, was the designated audience member meant to catch the act. But why? Why were the roles reversed? Why was Scarlett the one on the bed? And then, like a robot whose batteries were dying, Richard turned his head mechanically, slowly. He looked at me. For the first time that night, he truly saw me. In his eyes, there was no longer any guilt or cowardice. There was only pure, unadulterated terror, the kind of terror one feels upon realizing they have catastrophically misjudged an opponent. He saw the icy calm in my eyes. He saw the faint smirk playing on my lips. He understood everything. I knew. I had known everything from the start. I wasn't the victim. I was the puppeteer, pulling the strings of this entire charade. Swapping the cocktails, my appearance at the door, it was all part of my calculation. Richard's face went from pale to white to a deathly gray. He no longer felt anger toward Scarlett. He no longer felt humiliated. He felt only a primal fear, a fear of the woman he had lived with for 20 years, but had never truly understood. He had awakened a sleeping lioness, and now he was facing her wrath. He staggered back, the world seeming to sway and crumble around him. He braced a hand against the doorframe to keep from falling. He wanted to speak, to ask, to accuse me, but no words would come. Because he knew that whatever he said, it was already too late. He had lost. He had lost a chess game where he didn't even know he was a pawn. The woman he had trusted so implicitly had betrayed him spectacularly. And the woman he had betrayed so callously now held his life in her hands, deciding his entire fate. He was finished, dead in the midst of the most brutal and miserable truth. Richard leaned against the doorframe, his body heavy, as if all life had been drained from it. He no longer screamed or raged. He was an empty shell, staring with hollow eyes at the squalid scene on the bed, where his young mistress was still moaning in a stupor. His silence was more terrifying than any curse. It was the silence of a man who has accepted complete defeat. I knew the perfect moment had arrived. I walked silently and stood directly behind him, so close I could feel the tremors running through his body. I didn't look at the bed. My target was never Scarlett. She was, from beginning to end, a mere pawn. The person I truly wanted to break, the one I wanted to savor every moment of his agony, was the man standing before me. I leaned in close to his ear and whispered, my voice devoid of its earlier feigned tremor. It was now as cold as ice, sharp, and terrifyingly calm. Just loud enough for him to hear, like the whisper of a devil. The show your girlfriend prepared for me is so much more realistic when she's the star, don't you think? Richard's entire body jolted as if electrocuted. He whipped his head around to look at me, his eyes no longer empty but filled with sheer horror. He understood completely. There was no longer a shadow of a doubt. I didn't give him a chance to speak. I continued, my voice still deathly cold. So, Richard, is the view impressive enough? Or would you like for everyone, all our partners, all our employees, our family and friends, to enjoy this video with you? I nodded my head slightly toward Vince, who still held the phone, the most powerful weapon of destruction. My words were not a question. They were a threat, a verdict. Richard opened his mouth, then snapped it shut. He shook his head, a desperate, pathetic gesture. He knew I wasn't bluffing. After what had just happened, he understood better than anyone that I was more than capable of it. He had misjudged me. He had underestimated the woman who had weathered 2 decades of storms with him. He had forgotten that to survive and succeed in the cutthroat business world, I couldn't just be a gentle housewife. I had a mind and a heart of steel. Meanwhile, on the bed, the effects of the powerful aphrodisiac were finally beginning to wane. Scarlett was slowly regaining consciousness. The fire in her body was gone, replaced by an exhausted ache and a terrifying emptiness. She blinked dazedly, trying to make sense of her surroundings. The first thing she saw was Richard and me in the doorway. A flash of panic crossed her eyes. What was the plan? Oh, right, catching her in the act. She was supposed to be the one doing the catching, so why was she the one in bed? Why was she naked? And who was this man sitting next to her? Her memory started to return in fragmented, confusing pieces. The blue cocktail, the heat, the loss of control, and this man. Scarlett shot up like a spring, her face devoid of all color. She frantically pulled the thin sheet over her body and stared at us, her eyes wide with terror and disbelief. Richard? Victoria? She stammered. What's going on? She was still trying to act, to play the role of the innocent victim waking from a nightmare. But it was too late. The show was over. I remained silent, yielding the stage to her. I wanted to see what kind of performance she could still muster, and Scarlett did not disappoint. Within seconds, the panic on her face morphed into an expression of wronged fury. She started to sob, crocodile tears streaming down her cheeks. She pointed a finger at me and shrieked, her voice thick with righteous indignation. "It was you! This was all you're doing! Richard, don't believe her! She set me up! She drugged my drink and sent this bastard in here to hurt me! She did it out of jealousy, to ruin me! You see how vicious she is?" She acted her part perfectly, a tear-filled performance that brilliantly transformed her from perpetrator to victim. Any other man, unaware of the truth, might have been swayed, but not me. And Richard was no longer foolish enough to believe her lies. He just stood there, his face blank, not saying a word. His silence was the most powerful guilty verdict he could deliver. Seeing Richard's lack of response, Scarlett screamed even more frantically. "Don't you believe me, Richard? I'm the victim here. We have to call the police. We have to put this man and that evil witch in jail. She framed me. She defiled me." "Call the police?" I finally spoke. My voice was still calm, but every word carried the weight of a hammer blow. "That's not a bad idea, Scarlett. I was planning on it myself." I slowly walked into the room, stopping beside Vince. He understood my cue and immediately handed me the phone. I took it and swiped the screen. "If you want to call the police, you'll need evidence, won't you?" I said, looking Scarlett straight in the eye, giving her no room to escape. "The first piece of evidence would probably be this video." I held up the phone. On the screen, the video of her and Vince's entire hot scene was playing, crystal clear from beginning to end. Scarlett's face turned sheet white. She stammered, You, don't rush." I cut her off. This video alone might not be enough to prove who set up whom, but luckily for me, I have something else. Without another word, I pressed play. And once again, the audio recording of the conversation between Scarlett and Vince filled the room, this time clearer and more damning than ever. Here's the plan. Slip an aphrodisiac into that old hag's drink. Film everything. Force her into a divorce where she gets nothing. When the recording ended, the room fell into an absolute silence, broken only by Scarlett's ragged gasps. She sat on the bed of her shame, mouth agape, eyes wide, her body frozen. All her words, all her acting, all her accusations had been rendered meaningless in the face of this irrefutable proof. She had dug her own grave, and then she had jumped right into it. I looked at her, at the complete collapse in the eyes of someone who had once been so arrogant. I felt no pity, only a cold satisfaction. "So," I asked, my voice still steady, "do you still want to call the police? Or would you prefer I send this audio file?" along with that very hot video you just made, to our entire board of directors and every media outlet in the country. Let them all see what our brilliant head of marketing is really like." Scarlett didn't answer. She could only shake her head in despair, tears and snot mixing on her face, a truly pathetic sight. The game was well and truly over, and I was the absolute victor. The luxurious suite was submerged in a suffocating silence, punctuated only by Scarlett's pathetic sobs. She was huddled on the bed, the thin sheet failing to cover the humiliation that enveloped her. The audio recording had been a death sentence, closing every door, sealing every escape route. She was utterly cornered. Richard remained motionless in the corner, his back pressed against the cold wall. He no longer looked at Scarlett, and he didn't have the courage to look at me. His gaze was empty, fixed on the gleaming marble floor, as if searching for a hole to crawl into. He had lost everything: trust, love, pride, and soon his career and his fortune. I looked at the two wretched people before me and felt nothing. No elation, no pity, just an icy calm. It was time to end this drama and take back what was rightfully mine. I walked slowly to the desk in the corner and pulled a neatly organized file folder from my designer handbag. I approached Richard, who was still standing there like a man in a trance, and placed the folder on the small table beside him. "Take a look," I said, my voice devoid of any emotion. "This is everything I've been preparing for the last 6 months." With a trembling hand, he looked up, his hollow eyes falling on the folder. On the cover, in bold, clear letters, were the words, "Divorce Petition." Inside were other documents: a property settlement agreement, proof of the unaccounted, for company funds he had siphoned off to support his mistress, and copies of all the photos and messages the private investigator had collected. Everything was meticulously and professionally prepared, leaving no loopholes. Richard looked from the divorce papers back to me. For the first time in a very long time, I saw a flicker of pleading, of begging for forgiveness in his eyes. "Victoria," he stammered, about to say something, but I gave him no chance. "The game is over, Richard." I cut him off, my voice as final as a gavel strike. "You have only one path forward. Sign here." I took an expensive fountain pen from my pocket and placed it on top of the petition. "I am taking back what belongs to me. Half of our shared assets, this house, the cars, and half of your shares in the company. Everything will be transferred back to me, as outlined in this agreement." I paused, letting each word sink deep into his shattered mind. Then, my voice grew even colder. "I will have full custody of the children. I don't want them growing up with a father who is morally compromised. As for child support, you can pay it or not, according to your conscience. I won't ask for it." Richard crumbled. He slid down the wall and slumped to the floor, clutching his head in his hands. His once immaculate hair was a mess. He began to weep a silent, wrenching sob, his broad shoulders shaking violently. The powerful CEO, the man who was once my world, now looked like nothing more than a lost, broken child. But my heart felt no stirring of sympathy. It was numb. "In exchange for your cooperation," I continued, my voice merciless, "I will grant you one final act of grace. Everything that happened tonight, the two of you, your scheme, this hot video," I glanced at Vince, who still stood silently in the shadows, "will never see the light of day. I will protect what little is left of your reputation. It's the last kindness I can offer the man who was once my husband." I bent down slightly, bringing my face close to his. My voice was a whisper, but it was sharp enough to pierce his heart. "I'm giving you your freedom. The freedom to be with the woman you craved so much you were willing to trample over everything. You can go to her right now." My words were both a mercy and the ultimate insult. I wasn't trapping him, but I was stripping him of everything: his wealth, his status, his family, his pride. I was leaving him with nothing but a now exposed mistress and a bleak future. Richard lifted his tear-streaked face and looked at me, his eyes a portrait of regret and despair. He knew this was the only way. Defying me now would mean losing, quite literally, everything. With trembling hands, he pushed himself up. He staggered over, picked up the pen, his hand shaking so violently it slipped and clattered to the floor. He bent down again to retrieve it and finally placed the nib on the signature line. His handwriting, once so sharp and confident, was now the unsteady scrawl of a dying man. He signed his name, the signature that officially ended our 20 years of marriage. When he was done, he let the pen drop from his nerveless fingers. He said nothing more. He turned silently and walked out of the room, his stooped back looking 10 years older than it had that morning. He didn't even spare Scarlett a final glance. To him, she was no longer a passionate lover, but the embodiment of his foolishness, the source of all his tragedy. The game was over. After Richard left, only Vince, Scarlett, and I remained. She was still weeping pathetically. Vince, as promised, walked over and placed Scarlett's phone on the table. "Ma'am, it's done." I nodded and took a thick envelope from my handbag. "Here is the rest of what you're owed. Thank you for your cooperation." Vince took it, didn't bother to count it, gave me a respectful nod, and disappeared as quietly as he had appeared. Now it was just the two of us. Scarlett looked at me, her swollen eyes a mix of hatred and pleading. "Victoria, please, forgive me." I looked at her coldly. "Forgiveness? Do you think you have the right to utter that word?" "I have no desire to dirty my hands, but know this. Starting tomorrow, you will receive a termination notice from the company. And if I ever see you lurking anywhere near my family again, don't blame me if this video is accidentally recovered and sent to your parents back home." It was the final, devastating blow. Scarlett broke completely. She knew her career was over, her future destroyed, and she was left with nothing. I said nothing more. I turned and walked calmly out of room 2107, leaving behind the ashes of betrayal and a sordid conspiracy. I had not only protected my assets, I had reclaimed my dignity in the most spectacular way possible. Epilogue. The heavy wooden door of room 2107 clicked shut behind me. The sound was not a slam of anger, but a soft, decisive click of finality. To me, it was the sound of liberation. It was the last lock turning, releasing me from the invisible prison I had confined myself to for the past 6 months, a prison of lies, pain, and weary calculation. Now, it was all over. I stood alone in the long, quiet hallway and took a deep breath of the cool, conditioned air. It no longer felt oppressive. It felt empty and strangely light. I didn't return to the ballroom, where curious eyes and whispers were surely still waiting. That place no longer belonged to me. My play had ended. I quietly took the elevator down to the parking garage and drove home, to the house that was now truly mine. That night, for the first time in half a year, I slept deeply, dreamlessly. When the first rays of morning sun streamed through the window, I felt not loneliness, but a profound sense of peace. A new chapter of my life, one free from the shadow of betrayal, had truly begun. Life for me and my children after the divorce was surprisingly smooth. It was not depressing or lacking, but rather peaceful and abundant. Half of the considerable fortune from the settlement was more than enough for the three of us to live comfortably for the rest of our lives. But the real peace I felt didn't come from the numbers in a bank account. It came from the very air in our home. With the lies and secrets gone, the house felt larger, brighter. Mornings were filled with my children's laughter, their debates over movies, their chatter about school. Dinners were no longer a heavy obligation, but a warm time to share our lives without barriers. My 2 children, old enough to understand, were heartbroken at first, but they had quietly watched their mother's pain and patience for a long time. So when they saw me rise up, strong and decisive, to reclaim what was mine, their hurt turned into respect. They saw me not as a pitiful victim, but as a hero, an example of strength. They became my staunchest supporters. As for Richard, he fulfilled his end of the agreement. All transfers of property and shares were completed quickly and quietly. After leaving the house, he truly vanished from my life. I heard he never sought out Scarlett. The love he had for her was apparently not strong enough to overcome the humiliation of witnessing her with another man, and worse, realizing he was just a fool in her dirty scheme. He chose to live alone in a smaller apartment, quietly confronting his emptiness and regret. Scarlett's fate was similar. Without Richard as her backer, and with an indelible stain on her reputation, she was quickly ostracized from the high society she had tried so hard to enter. No major corporation would hire someone with her history. I heard she had to sell the apartment and car Richard had bought her to pay off debts before leaving the city. I didn't gloat over her downfall. I simply saw it as the inevitable law of life. You reap what you sow. Now, sitting alone in my quiet garden, watching the roses I planted myself bloom in the afternoon sun, I have the peace to reflect on it all. My story is not just one of betrayal and revenge. It is a story with expensive lessons I had to pay for with my youth and trust. And today, I want to share them, not as a preacher, but as someone who has navigated the storm, hoping they might be a small candle for someone else lost in the dark. First, and most importantly, is the lesson of self-worth, especially for us women. Society often teaches us to sacrifice, to be generous, to put the happiness of our family, our husband, our children first. That is not wrong, but sacrifice should never mean losing yourself. Don't make my mistake of stepping back completely, of placing your entire life and career in one man's hands and naively believing it is a guarantee of security. Because when you lose your own independent value, when you make yourself a planet orbiting a single sun, your whole world will collapse if that sun decides to change its course. Always maintain your own path, your own career, your own financial independence. It's not just about money, it's about autonomy, a voice, and the strongest armor to protect your dignity when storms hit. The second lesson is about how to face betrayal. When you discover you've been cheated on, the instinctive reaction is pain, anger, and the urge to make a scene. But stop and ask yourself, what does that achieve? A moment of catharsis, followed by the image of a pitiful, out-of-control woman. You diminish your own value and inadvertently push the betrayer closer to his accomplice. Sometimes, silence and cold reason are the deadliest weapons. Channel your tears into action. Instead of crying, calmly collect evidence. Instead of screaming, quietly devise a plan. Show them, and the world, that you are not a weak victim, but a formidable opponent. When you have the proof in your hands, you hold the power to write the ending to your own story, a fair and dignified ending. And the final lesson, perhaps the hardest to practice, is about letting go and forgiveness. I don't mean forgiving those who hurt you. They don't deserve it. I mean forgiving yourself. Forgive yourself for your past naivete, for your blind trust. Forgive yourself for the days you let pain consume you. Letting go doesn't mean forgetting. It means accepting that it happened, and more importantly, refusing to let it continue to hurt your present and your future. Holding on to hatred is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. It only corrodes your own soul. Life is short. Do not waste your precious remaining years on negative emotions for people who are not worth it. Drop that heavy stone and open your arms to embrace a new future, a lighter, more peaceful life. My story ends here. Every afternoon now, I sit in this garden I love, with my children growing up beside me. I am no longer a betrayed wife or a woman fighting for justice. I am just Victoria, a mother, a businesswoman, and a person who bravely navigated a storm and found true peace for her soul. I took everything back, not with schemes, but with wisdom and courage. And I hope my story can give a little strength and faith to anyone else facing the tempests of life. Always remember, after the rain, there isn't just a clear sky, but also a rainbow. And the sun tomorrow is always brighter and warmer than it was yesterday.